If you want to be a great family history writer, sometimes you need to learn the techniques found in newspaper articles. Howdy, my name is Devin Noelle, and today I want to help you write better family history stories by using a technique I learned as a journalist for 16 years. This technique doesn't have a name, but it is something newspaper writers and editors use instinctively. So I like to call it the newspaper naming technique. In short, the technique defines how you identify a person on the second reference, but it also involves identifying a person in any subsequent instances by utilizing name variations and biographical descriptors. In 1940, Lewis worked at a chicken processing plant. A coworker told Lewis that he was dating a gal called Chicken. Lewis didn't believe the coworker and said, "I'd like to meet her." The coworker likely lived to regret the day he introduced Lewis to Chicken, also known as Louise. Lewis and Louise quickly fell in love, and the coworker soon sought out a new girlfriend. Reading that paragraph, you might think, where are your pronouns? In a previous video, I discussed not playing the pronoun game and leaving your reader confused about who you are referencing. However, I excluded the pronouns so we could discuss the newspaper naming technique. But notice I didn't fully identify the person on their first reference. Furthermore, I used the first name on the second and subsequent references. This writing style is incredibly dull. The APA Style Guide and various newspapers define how they will reference a person after first using their full name. In this video, you will learn several ways to identify your ancestors by incorporating the commonly used newspaper techniques. Use your story's main character's full name the first time you identify them in your family history. When introducing additional family members, use their full names at the onset. You may exclude the full name of friends, neighbors, or associates in your ancestor stories if you so desire. However, be intentional about this decision. For example, if a friend, associate, or neighbor is more family than not, you should include their full name in their introduction. On the other hand, if you mention someone equivalent to an acquaintance, like the mailman, you don't necessarily need to use their full name in your story. For the rest of the list, you must have identified someone by their full name before you can use these other options. Once you have used a relevant person's first name, you can then refer to them by their first given name if they preferred that name. From the examples listed previously, notice how I can now use their given names. Our ancestors often have many titles: Mr., Mrs., Miss, Captain, Major, Doctor, Uncle, Grandpa, and more are titles you can use to refer to persons in your stories. For instance, Mr. Brown, Grandma Wood, and Dr. Henshaw can help us know someone's gender, relationship, and occupations at a glance. Be careful, because some of your ancestors might have titles for their given names. For instance, I researched Major James Townley and couldn't find a military service record for this man. As it turns out, his parents named this young man Major as his first name. While writing his story, I need to clarify this for my readers. Do you have similar ancestors with titles as their given names? Growing up in Texas or any southern state, children often learn that you did not refer to an adult by their given name without adding a title. Fortunately, this technique works well when you want to show a less formal relationship with a person. Some examples include Miss Penny, Sister Martha, and Uncle Wyatt. Sometimes our ancestors use their initials, which allows us to do so as well. I recommend this option only if you have documents referencing which initials they used. Now, you don't have to always include a surname with the initials. However, using initials and surnames provides more ways to mention an ancestor. Notice how many options I have for this legendary Aggie's name. Now, only one sounds right to those who attended Texas A&M University. No matter the source of a nickname, some of our ancestors had them. If they do, we can utilize them in our stories. Additionally, you do not always have to include the surname with a nickname, which gives you more naming possibilities. Here are a few examples you may encounter. You might be confused by the last one on this list. I have an ancestor that everyone on my side of the family knew as Mary Jane. As it turns out, her brother called her Mary Jane when she was little because she loved wearing Mary Jane shoes. The name stuck with the family and friends, but her real name is Annie. If you find an ancestor with such a confusing nickname, be sure to explain how they received their alias at least once in your story. This technique is used frequently in a variety of newspapers. However, the clearest example appears in the sports sections. Authors initially identify players by their first and last names, such as Dante Hall or Randy McGowan. After that, the second reference typically only uses their surname, such as Hall or McGowan. Now, this technique works really well with colleagues, team members, military units, fraternal groups, or similar bands of brothers. Those options are great, but I'll invite you to kick identifiers into overdrives. Our ancestors are more than a name. Journalists are aware of this and frequently leverage descriptors in place of names. Now think again of sports news articles. Perhaps you read about a football player named Dante Hall, but what position did he play? The Dante Hall I'm referring to played right back. In many articles about Dante Hall, you will see the author switch to referencing him only by his position, right back. The right back carried the ball into the end zone to score the critical game-winning touchdown. Notice how using descriptors of what Dante is or does can make your story more exciting and clear. Start implementing these techniques and you will enhance your story dramatically and quickly. Here are several examples of identifying your ancestor without using their name. The first is occupation, the engineer, the plumber. You can also use position title. This one is different than title plus surname technique because you can use the title alone. You don't often use Mrs. or Mr. in a story. That's just weird. For example, the dean was well beloved by his co-workers for his organizational skills, but disliked by the students because he was aloof. If we had previously said John Smith was the dean of the business college at Alabama, you can later just call him the dean. Personality descriptors typically cannot stand alone. Instead, you need to combine them with another descriptor. For example, the distraught youth wanted an escape after his mother died. If you had said the distraught, no one would know what you were talking about. So don't confuse your readers with descriptors. Instead, combine them with other descriptors and you will make a great story. And age is great because you can use descriptive words like teenager and citizen, or a numerical value like 13 or 30-year-old. Not only that, an age can stand alone. The 32-year-old married for the first time. Fictional authors use this tip more than newspaper writers do, but it's one worth listing. The gangly, ginger-haired girl tried to save her mangy dog from an abusive ruffian. Familial and associate relationship titles can help identify a person without their name. His neighbors sued Thomas for moving the disputed fence too far into his property. Now that I showed you different techniques, let me show you the techniques in actions. On screen, you will see the revised story snippet from the beginning with the newspaper naming techniques called out in brackets. Notice all the ways I referenced Lewis from the initial story. In 1940, Lewis Brown, that's his full name, worked at a chicken processing plant. The glasses-wearing slender man, that's appearance, suspected a coworker lied after declaring he was dating a gal called Chicken. The disbelieving, that's personality, 22-year-old, that's age, called his friends, that's a relationship, for the coworker. Finally, his buddy, which is another relationship name, agreed to introduce Lewis. Now we're using his nickname, which is a form of his given name, to a slender 5'5" tall brunette. Now this is an appearance, named Louise Eleanor Long, the full name, affectionately known as Chicken, which is her nickname. Do you see how much more enjoyable your story becomes when you do not always use a person's name? It doesn't take much effort. First, simply do a find and replace search on your draft. Then decide if you can afford to switch things up each time you see your ancestor's name. Admittedly, you will use your ancestor's given name more often than the other descriptors to ensure you have clarity in your writing. However, apply this naming technique and notice how quickly your story stops being boring. If you have other suggestions on how we can identify our ancestors in unique and enjoyable ways, be sure to leave those in the comments so others can learn from your success. Thanks for watching. Please consider subscribing to this channel. And if you're ready for the next writing tip, check out this video right up there.